Welcome to Austin Tech Connect, the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. Presented to you by NetSpend. Homegrown in Austin, NetSpend has been a leading provider of consumer and business payment solutions for almost 25 years. From prepaid cards to mobile bank accounts to money movement services, NetSpend connects people, brands, and payment products to deliver innovative financial solutions.
Hey there, you have found another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the podcast that talks about the future of Austin's technology community. My name is Tom Singer, and I work with the Austin Technology Council. And every single week, we invite local business people here to the show to talk about their history, their company, and where they think the future of Austin is going. The whole idea behind this is the more we can have conversations, the more we can feel connected to other people in the ecosystem, the more Austin can thrive. And today we have on the show CC Mullen, and she is the founder and CEO of Abilities Amplified. Hey, CC, welcome to Austin Tech Connect.
Thank you, Tom. It's a delight to be here.
So I have known CC from the Austin tech community for probably close to 20 years. She's lived here 23 years. And what she does is she helps companies, teams, and people increase their abilities and capabilities so that they can achieve more. And, you know, she's one of these people who really believes that the resources and the tools, they're out there. We have best practices. And she just goes crazy trying to teach people to employ and use the systems that are already out there so that they can thrive. She grew up all over the United States. She was one of those kids who moved around a lot. She went to Boston University and got an MBA from Pepperdine, which I know because I grew up in Los Angeles, is the most beautiful college campus in America. Is that true?
It was an MBA for working people, and they brought the professors to us, so we didn't get the advantage of the campus. We got the advantage of the education.
So you didn't actually get to sit there and look at the Pacific Ocean every day?
Unfortunately not.
Probably better, because there was no distraction of the beauty of that campus.
Exactly. Yeah. A Houston conference room is not the same.
So, CC, let's go back to the early days of your career after Boston University. Where did you go? How did you get started? What did you do?
I actually joined an oil and gas company, and that led me to Houston, Texas, which I fell in love with, and I'm still here, still loving it, and would rather be here than anywhere else. Oil and gas was a blast. I ended up in Denver after 8 years, progressively progressing, and then the whole industry crashed. Okay, back to Texas, became a recruiter, but I was cared more about what the companies did with the people I placed with them once they got them than I did about placing another person. So I decided, and there was nobody around in San Antonio, Texas at that time to hire me to be a consultant. So I hired myself, hung out a shingle, took a flying leap and became a consultant. And that was, I think, like 35 years ago, something like a long time ago.
So you were kind of ahead of the game then, because the truth of the matter was a lot of people, I've done it in my career. Many people do it. A lot of people have a side hustle where they're coaching and consulting and doing other things.
Right.
But 35 years ago to say, I'm now a consulting company. I am CC, boom, hanging out your own shingle. That was a little bit of a trailblazer, wasn't it? Especially, for women.
It was a bit, yes. It was. It's been an interesting experiences. The great thing about being a consultant, though, is you find out what works, and you can bring it to different companies, and you find out more what works. And you're always in this kind of feel what's working, what works here, what works there. How can you adapt it? And the variety is like the Austin Technology Council. There's all sorts of companies, and everybody's got something to share. It's the same application.
So you've done a lot of different types of sort of productivity and capability consulting over the years. So when you first started, what were you doing? Then I wanted to switch over to what you're doing today, because I'm really fascinated. And the reason I brought you on the show was to talk about this whole idea of modeling excellence. But let's go back to when you started 35 years ago. What type of consulting were you doing for the companies? What kind of tools were you bringing to them?
Originally, it was operational processes like HB Zachary. I moved from there to infrastructures, what are the functions of the company, what are the jobs, what are the responsibilities, what is the pay structure, what are the incentives, how can I became a compensation consultant, how can you drive engagement, when we all figured out what the drivers were, how you tie individuals into the company goals, all the way through that. Did that with a lot of companies in Austin, particularly in the high tech, particularly with software companies. So a lot of whom are no longer around, but when they were around, like Broadjump and all the ones that have kind of evolved, and some of the ones that are still quite there, that went from 10 people to, in some cases, 200, 1,000, and grew and emerged and blended. And that has been a joy to be involved with all of them and watch them all grow with the Austin Technology Council and the whole community of that. And with all that, though, I'm still once you get the structure, once you get the pay, once you get the incentive, it's about the communications. It's about how the people interact. So I'm certified in creating partnership in business between all the individuals there. And what I really saw was that there is a sort of a missing link in skills, that there are people, there's this difference that makes a difference. But how do you get it? And that there's people on a team and they're all doing the same job, but somebody's better. And they can't tell you why they are, and nobody else can either, but they'd really like to clone that person, or at least clone that ability. The great news is, through all my NLP, and I'm double mastered, certified, and all that, neuro-linguistic programming, they learned years ago there's a structure. There's a structure to excellence that you can capture, and you can create a model of what actually is inside a person, inside their head, inside their feelings, inside their perspective. All of that. Create a model from it and create a training that teaches other people how to step into that, how to take that on, how to expand that, and become better at that ability. And that's when I decided that I love that. It's a missing link in this fast-growing, upskilling, reskilling, ever-changing environment that can really, really help companies and individuals. So that's when I rebranded Abilities Amplified, and I'm focusing on that.
So I love the name Abilities Amplified because, like you said, there's always the people on the team who have those abilities. They're thriving, they're excelling. And then you have other people who are doing fine, but they're not at that same level. So you are now focusing on teaching this thing called modeling excellence. And when we spoke about this, it sort of spoke to me. It was like, wow, that is so fascinating. So what is modeling excellence? Where does it come from? And how did you then come to be teaching this to companies?
Modeling excellence came from originally NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming people, who were always about how do you take how our brains work, how our behaviors work, our language patterns, put them all together and make positive changes. And they, as I said, they realized that there were people that were excellent at something in a way different from others. And there was a structure. And when they studied and they developed a process, a series of questions to unravel what's underneath that person's excellence. So I'm master certified in it. I've been doing it for quite a while. One of my coaches is one of the kind of premier modelers in the U.S. There's a whole genealogy history, like any field of study. It's about mastery. So I learn as much as I can, as often as I can, and I love to share it. But there's just basically, it's a process, like I said to you. Your ability to create relationships, that's an ability I can create a model of and a training of, so other people can get better at it by asking you a series of questions. And you won't even know the answer to those before we start. It's just, it's taking what I love. It's like, I talk about, companies can leverage the excellence they've already got on board, in ways they don't even know about.
So that's what really sort of fascinated me is we think so much, coming out of the last few years with the Great Resignation and people quiet quitting and just sort of disappearing. Companies have a brain trust, but when somebody leaves, that brain trust leaves with them, and there's no way to train. There's no way to train the next person. And even for an individual, if you know you're leaving and you give a month's notice and they hire somebody, you don't know how to train that stuff in your head to the next person.
Right.
So what really fascinated me was the ability to capture sort of the excellence of individual employees, and then create a training program around it so that you have that continuity for the company. But this is something a lot of companies don't do. I would go out on a limb here and say most companies have never thought, how do we capture that excellence? How do we model it? And then that next step of how do we create training? So my question for you is, how do you even convince an executive that this is important?
I think by telling the story, really. One person I was talking to about a joke, he said, well, if I could clone those 3 people, I could take over the world. I said, we can't clone the people, but we can clone the ability. And you can take over the world that way. It's really about stories. It's like if you have one company had multiple project managers all over the world. In that group, 3 had special abilities. One was brilliant at finance, one was brilliant at relationships, one was brilliant at closing deals. Take those abilities, train the rest to get better at them. They're going to take over the world. I mean, it's that sort of stories. It's been used, like I said, it's been around for 40 plus years. It's been used all over the world. It's usually companies tend to keep it sort of quiet and not necessarily publish that that's what they're doing, but it's accelerated learning that really, really works. I mean, the U.S. Army's used it. American Express has used it. There's a local incredibly, very, very successful real estate company that uses it all the time for training the realtors. It's really sitting down and talking with them and talking about what would be the difference if more people in your company start behaving and performing like that person.
So, it's interesting because you've been here in Austin for 23 years, and you mentioned sort of companies that came and went, but during the time were the leaders of our ecosystem.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe they got sold or they got bought or for other reasons they're not around, but also some that are still around and have continued to grow and thrive.
Yeah.
Do you think for the companies that really reach those top levels where we're all talking about them, do you think, even if they haven't done it formally, do you think that they've embraced sort of some of this idea of modeling excellence along the way? I mean, is that something that is innate for some companies and is a reason that they thrive?
I think there is some. I was talking to someone, Angie Cartwright, who I respect immensely in the HR space, about this. And she actually does something similar that is around this, but it doesn't include the unconscious, this actual piece of it, which is kind of the one that will really leverage the difference. So I think the thriving companies, the progressive, the companies that are human-centric, and that's one of the reasons they're thriving, have done a lot of this unconsciously. It's often called mentorship.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But there's this actually, when you do the models of excellence, when you create, we call it mastery practice sets for a particular ability. That's a way of replicating that mentorship and then some, so others can do it. The mentor themselves can be doing something else. So it does that. It's that sort of thing. But I think the companies, yes, have been consciously or unconsciously, without calling it this, practicing some of this.
So one of the things you're really good at and you're really passionate about is this idea of finding existing resources and best practices and bringing them into companies. I am a big believer that best practices go a long way. So since I've joined the Austin Technology Council, one of the things that I've done is I've gotten very involved with TECNA, and that is the North American Association of Technology Councils. I don't know how TECNA gets spelled out in there. It's like Technology Councils of North America. I guess that would be TECNA. And one of the things I've found is, as we're trying to sort of reinvent and respark a lot of things with ATC, that finding the councils that are out there doing a really good job and actually asking them about the best practices and having them mentor me is actually bringing us some really good traction in what we're trying to do with ATC. So how important do you think it is for companies to really start looking for best practices rather than reinventing the wheel all the time?
I think it's very important with one caveat. It used to be that there were published best practices, Malcolm Baldrige, all sorts of big published best practices that were big companies. And, a small software startup would try to put those on and there would be no way in heck.
Yeah. Six Sigma is not the right thing for a company of 2 people.
Exactly. Though some tried. I even tried it with some. That was not correct. The fit. So best practices borrowing the concept, borrowing the approach, and then tailoring it for the circumstances. Now, that said, there are a lot of great things going on with similar size companies, similar situations, similar industries that can be borrowed. But there's never one size fits all, never. So, yeah.
So when you and I talked before we started recording, we got talking about NLP and linguistic programming. And some people kind of cringe when they hear NLP. I know from the business end, some people think it's manipulation. Some people think, I'm actually very positive on what NLP does and stands for. How did you get involved teaching NLP, and why is it a good thing?
Why it's a good thing is I got involved. I actually got certified in the whole thing like 20 years ago, and then I went back and recertified and everything like 6 years ago. It is a way to, Einstein says multiple perspectives is genius. And we all know that when we can look at something from a different perspective, we see it differently. We have insights. Everything shifts, and we can do more and be more. That is part of what NLP does. It's brilliant at changing perspectives, getting people unstuck, changing habitual behaviors. So there's room for more expanding behaviors, more useful behaviors in the future. And that's why I like it. That's why I'm passionate about it. That's why it's got all sorts of things, including I just coached a woman who's going through board exams on how to be resourceful in the middle of a 4-hour, no break, no water, no nothing exam.
Well,
using NLP.
Well, you talk about the fact that it gets people unstuck. I know from my own career, from having managed people, from being managed by people, that it's common that people get stuck, and we don't want to admit it, right? We don't want to say, "Oh, I'm a little bit in over my head," or my mindset isn't getting me to that next level. How can an executive own up to the fact that, hey, sometimes I need a coach, and maybe this type of coaching to get me unstuck is what I need to take myself and my company to the next level? How do people get by the stigma of asking for help, of asking for coaching?
I think one of the things I have also taken and firmly believe in is improv.
That's
improv
awesome.
is just a yes and. Just experiment wildly. Just what the heck? Try it. That's fail. There is no failure, Tom. There's only feedback.
Nice.
It's just, warmer, colder, feedback. So for an executive, it's like, experiment.
So I love the idea of improv for executives. I think it's one of the smartest things that people can do. As many people know, before joining ATC, I made my living as a professional speaker for many years. And early in my career, I took an improv class so that I could think on my feet on stage and learn. And then 5 years ago, I started doing stand-up comedy, which is even harder. Like I tell everybody, stand-up comedy is the hardest use of the spoken word. I've given over 1,200 professional speeches. I've done over 1,200 live interviews like this for podcasts, for this show, for my own podcast, and for several others that I was the host of for a number of years. And stand-up comedy is way harder than interviewing. It's harder than giving a speech. Heck, it's harder. Absolutely. It's harder than being CEO of the Austin Technology Council. I think pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, no matter what it is a great way to grow. Do you agree with that?
Yes. I mean, and there's actually a quick brain hack that Mel Robbins found and is published. And that is that we have 5 seconds before our brain will tell us all the reasons why not to do something. And if you do the NASA countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it actually rewires the front of your brain. You've got 5 seconds to take action. So add it in, take action.
Nice. So you've been around the tech community, serving a lot of tech companies for a long time. What is sort of your viewpoint of where we've been over the last 20 plus years, where we are now, and where the ecosystem of Austin Tech is going? What's sort of your thoughts about the past, present, and future of tech in Austin?
It used to be very prescribed. There were a certain amount of venture capitalists like Austin Ventures. There were groups that went from company to company. It was routine. It was boxes, basically. And some boxes grew and some boxes didn't grow. and everybody sort of knew the rules and the regulations. Then it started taking off with all the startups and changing radically. And the types of companies, the structure of companies, and just like the millions of startups. And that has changed the landscape. It's changed the people. And then with the big companies coming in, so it's no longer, no people don't know each other. There's different groups. There's different interests. If you are any sort of leader or executive or manager, or even individual in a technology company, who do you listen to? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? Where do you get your resources? Because there are so many options. And then there's clusters. So to me, the opportunity here, and that you are champion, is how do we come together to collectively grow and collectively thrive? How do we sort of get our hands around how can we, there's all these resources. How do we help people access them? How do we help companies grow? How do we help them learn from each other? How do we create that platform for us all to grow? I mean, there are so many brilliant companies and people and opportunities here. As just let's take advantage of it.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And it is true that we have had the last 10 years, we've experienced unprecedented growth. And with that comes a lot of people, and it's just harder to assimilate them all in. I think you summed it up that when we were a small town, it was like, you had a startup, you talked to these people, you got some funding, you had this lawyer, you had this bank. There sort of was a path 25 years ago as to how it happened. Now, we have a robust ecosystem. So, there's not just a couple of banks. There's a dozen banks that could all serve you well. There's a dozen lawyers that could serve you well. There's a dozen groups like the Austin Technology Council that maybe you should be involved with. And ATC, we're trying to be that thread that welcomes everybody, that partners with everybody, that collaborates with everybody, that encourages conversations with everybody to be able to support that community. Because if we're not careful, I always say we could kill this golden goose. And so we've got to be very cautious that we are going back to that people side of business where everybody should have access to a seat at the table. So I think you're right that I think that is where we've gone, where we've come from. But I do think that and I think you agree, we are poised for greatness still for Austin, right?
Yes. Oh, completely. We have everything that's needed. It's just a question of being perhaps a bit more thoughtful about how we deploy it and put it together. And I have noticed, because I'm involved still with all of a lot of the HR community, that the workshops are now not just about leader and manager development and all of that. It really is like the future of flexibility. How do you reimagine the office, the hybrid workspace, the need for there are great things going on we have to train the employees from the bottom up, because we're all going to thrive together. It's that sort of mentality. We are going to thrive together.
Well, and I loved your quote. I loved your quote from Einstein that, multiple perspectives is where the genius is found. I'm paraphrasing it, but basically, I think that's true inside companies. If we have people of different backgrounds, different education levels, different races, different genders, different ages,
Absolutely.
If we have all of this diversity, that's where the genius is going to come from. And the same thing is true for the Austin tech community. The more we can embrace all the different perspectives and have those multiple perspectives at our table, the better off we're going to be in the future.
Absolutely.
So CC, I ask everyone who comes on the show, before I let them go, I ask everyone who comes on the show this same question. And that is, I personally believe that community, collaboration, and conversations can solve all problems. And I often, when I speak, I often bring this back to, imagine for a second if every elected official in Washington, D.C., when they walked into the Capitol, whether they're a congressman or a senator, they had to live by community, collaboration, and conversations for everything they did inside that building. Do you think maybe we'd get more done? I would argue to say, yeah, that'd be a good thing. So I ask everybody those three words, and then I say, CC, which one of those words resonates the most with you and why?
They all resonate. I think one nuance that I discovered years ago, because I'm also have collaboration training. And when I started studying collaboration when it was first a glimpse, just a word, collaborate, the actual definition of collaboration is not just better teaming. It is co-creating something new together, taking our combined brain power outside of the job description boxes, co-creating something new in response to meet a vision and a challenge. And we need new. We have to have new to survive. We have to have new to thrive. And we need that mutual co-creation of all our brain powers to do it. And that's what collaboration is. And that, to me, is why I'm so excited about it. And yeah.
I love it. I think I wrote down co-creating something new together. That's going to be the next blog post for the Austin Technology Council. I think that resonated with me right there. That's what we're trying to do with ATC, and that's what our community needs. We need to co-create the next 10 years of our tech ecosystem.
Exactly.
But we need to do it together. We need everybody's voice right here at the table.
We need the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So, CC, the last question I ask is, you've lived here 23 years. You've seen a lot of the changes that go on. You've been to a lot of the places that are famous in Austin. If you had a friend come and visit from somebody you went to Boston College with, you hadn't talked to them, in many, many years, and they were coming through Austin, and you were going to take them to one place, be it a restaurant, be it an attraction, where would you take somebody who came to Austin for the first time so they could get the vibe of Austin?
Well, of course, I love to go hiking, so I'd probably take them to Reimer's Ranch, but that's not quite in Austin. So they could get the vibe of Austin. That's a great question. And if there was I'd love to show them something in sort of the alternative art scene, like an interesting, play, theater, improv, something like that, because I think that the creativity that is in Austin is so important. And there are beautiful buildings to see Austin from, and the night is gorgeous, and there's jazz music, and oh my goodness, there's so many places to take them, Tom.
Well, you're absolutely right. And we can't forget the importance of arts to Austin, right. The unique artists that we've had in Austin going back the 32 years I've lived here and longer is part of the fabric, and it's part of what makes our tech community great. So I think that's an awesome answer. So CC, thank you so much for being a guest here on Austin Tech Connect.
My pleasure.
Nice. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council, and we're trying to grow and change. Heck, we're trying to co-create something new together. So we need you. We need your voice at the table. Is your company supporting the Austin Technology Council? Now is a great time to join. You can find out more information at austintechnologycouncil.org.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Tech Connect podcast. Make sure your company is a member of the Austin Technology Council and add your voice to the future of our tech ecosystem in Central Texas.